So I figure what I would start with is just a basic acoustic guitar setup. And we'd go from there. And I was gonna sit down and do a whole bunch of stuff on tools, pull out tools and describe what they are, but I figure I'll just do that as I go. That way it'll make sense when I use the tools. Again, I'm not used to teaching. You know, I'm always in a shop working. So if I go too fast on something and you don't understand how something goes, just raise your hand, stop me, whatever. This is a good learning experience for me. I figure I've been doing this for 20 years now. It's my turn to give back. I never went to school for this. I've had plenty of people show me how to do things since the beginning. So it's just, it's gonna be good for all of us.
Jason, I told everybody there'd be plenty of time to ask questions.
Oh, good, good. So yeah, any questions anybody has at any time, you know, before the end of this 2 days, we're all gonna know each other really well. So, all right, first, what I'm using right here is, I actually use this at home. I've got a bench top like this at my shop. And it actually sits and mounts to a pedestal stand. And that pedestal stand allows me to raise the bench top up and down, and I can spin it around. And I have a small footprint for a bench top because it keeps me from being, I'm lazy about putting tools back. So the smaller the bench top I have, the less space I've got to junk up. And it's just a simple fact that, you know, if I've got tons of space, a guitar eventually is going to get laid down on top of a tool. And especially nitro cellulose lacquers, most of what guitars are finishes, they deem fairly easy. It's not the most durable finish. Modern day finishes, you know, with your polys and stuff, they don't damage as bad, so you get lucky on those. Anyway, my bench top on this one is poplar because it's slightly soft. The one I got at the shop is maple. I wish I had made it out of softer wood, because maple's pretty hard. If you hit it something on the side of it, it's gonna ding it. Felt pad. I love this thing. It's one of my favorite things ever. I got this from Jim Woodward back there. He bought a big roll of it, and it's not cheap, but felt works great. It's not like carpet. It doesn't collect screws. It doesn't do, you know, keep pretty much anything that gets on it. You can see it. It wipe off. You can get this fairly cheap in like 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch. It gets kind of pricey. Jim, do you remember what you paid for?
I think it was $90 or something.
Yeah, I mean, for how much? It was, you get a pretty good bit.
5 for 5, maybe.
Yeah.
With like EVA foam or something like that work?
That could work. Yeah, that'd be fine.
It all is not created equal. There's a company in Michigan that makes this.
Uh-huh.
Well, once you have it.
Yeah, I can't say enough about it. It's been great. I got the whole front bench of our shop when people bring guitars in for me to look at. It's covered with this stuff.
Those are little pads that they use for camping.
Uh-huh.
The little foam pads, about 1/2 inch thick. Little,
Uh-huh.
They work pretty good.
Yeah, they work good
And
too.
they're cheap.
And another thing is, some of you may have a vise like this. And then I redid this vise. I used to have it. It has a threaded rod that comes out the bottom that works pretty good because it'll usually fit inside of a bench dog hole. You can drill a hole through your table or your bench, and then it sits up high. And then I found that I usually, if I'm using one of those, these neck rockers, I made this one, but you can buy these from like Stu Mac. You'll hear me talk about Stu Mac all the time. Did this whole thing because I got tons of tools and stuff from them. This, I just glued a bunch of plywood together, cut it out on a bandsaw, and made, you know, this is pretty much a neck rocker. You may have all seen this before, but you can put your guitar on a bench like that. I never use it for that because it's not very stable, but if I was just changing strings at home, I probably would use it. What I use it for most of the time, I've drilled it for frets. So it can sit like this, and I've got frets. The other thing I use it for when I'm using a taller vise, or let's say I need to like today, I'll probably at some point take this, slide it down so I can take the guitar and put it the other way off of this. I use these, I put cork on one side. Yoga blocks work good for that too. It keeps your work off the bench. In other words, if that vise was taller or if I wanted to work at that angle, I could. And then it's padded. Tools can lay down here. You're not constantly laying the guitar down on your tools. Because you eventually will. All right, everybody can hear me fine, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the other thing that's good about this bench top is it goes on my pedestal with 4 bolts. So this one is the one that lives in my home workshop. I got a small basement, I got a little work area down there. My family never lets me go down there. So what I do is, let's say I want to work on my guitar, or I bring a guitar home to work on. If it's something basic like a setup, I put amplifier feet underneath this. The little rubber pads, I just took them off an old amplifier. Screwed them on the bottom. I'll pick this up just like I do at home. Walk upstairs, put it right down on my kitchen table. My kids are doing homework. I'm working on a guitar, and I'm sitting right there with the family. It works out good. So you don't have to have a lot of space in your house, especially if you're working on your own guitars. This, like I said, I made it out of poplar. All I did was I went and bought boards at Lowe's, poplar boards at Lowe's, glued them all together, sanded the top, and just made a bench. I took my vise that I got from Stu Mack. You can find these at Woodcraft. They're slightly different than ones at Woodcraft. It's got to be the same manufacturer. Stu Mack adds a few features. They redo these bolts. They put a different spinner on there. It comes with a handle. I take the handle off. You don't need the handle. The handle's just you're going to hit it and you're going to drop a guitar and it's going to hit here. And this is if you go as far as getting a vise like this, which I would say is one of the best purchases I've ever had. Whether I'm working on guitars or whether I'm, anything, it's a pattern maker's vise. So it conforms, the jaws will conform to whatever angle. And then if you use it the way it's intended to, it will spin a complete 360. Mine won't. I usually don't worry about it because my whole bench will spin in a 360. Also, what I have on my bench at the shop, I have a vacuum. It's called a Metro Vac. It looks like a little steel canister. I bolt it straight to I got pictures on my Instagram, and at some point we can pull that stuff up. Maybe put it on the screen. I've got it mounted to my pedestal, so I've got a small little shop vac basically. That's if you're going to set up to start doing stuff. If not, just pull a vacuum over your bench. So that's usually what I'm used to working on. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start evaluating this guitar. Let's see. I'm going to show you 2 different ways. When I first pull out a guitar to see what the setup's going to be and what I'm going to need to do to change it, I will check the neck relief. All right. All right, so my neck relief, this is actually a level that I ground flat off my other bar. All right, so and that's when I'm going to check my car in just a minute, see if I brought it. This is this one is ground flat on the bottom too. This is nice. When I first started out, I didn't have a leveling bar. So what I did was I found the flattest. That's just a level that you get at the hardware store. And so I ground that flat. I use this when I ground it flat off the bar that I normally use. And I like this, and I'll show you why later. Another good one that I just got is this, and we can use this. So that's a Stu Mac product, and so it's ground flat. This T that you see in here, it'll come into play later whenever I dress frets, how it's got a T shape, because it's gonna allow me to dress frets with the strings on the guitar. So that's nice. That eliminates the need for a neck jig in most cases. So I use this, I got a gauge like this. I'll put it on top and then I'll just make sure it's zeroed out. So let's see. See this here? I'm gonna basically put it on here. I'm going to zero this out. I'm going to show you how to do this with the feeler gauges too. I've got another tool that you may have not brought that measures on the actual frets.
Does that bar come with the gauge, or do you manufacture it?
This is a Stu Mac product. So, and everybody's going to get a chance to look at this because you can make one fairly simple. You know, it'll hold any kind of dial gauge. And then this has got points. This is actually for top deflection. And we'll go into that in a little bit whenever I show you how I would attempt a neck reset on a guitar. So this is, I bought this from Stu Mac. I've made one out of a T slide that goes into, what are those? What's those T slides, Jim? You made one out of one of those, didn't you?
Yeah, they're, you put them in a workbench or in a.
Yeah.
It's the jig to hold,
And then you can slide, you can make sliders that you can slide back and forth. It'll be,
yeah. T-tracks.
yeah, T-tracks, that's what it is. Alright, so I'm gonna zero this out. Alright, so let's pretend that you don't have one of these. This I'm gonna use to read the actual fingerboard because I can go in between the frets. But I wanna see what amount of relief I've got. And your relief in a neck, I always call it relief. Some people call it forward bow. Some people call it, or it's back bow if it's the opposite way. So let's say we got this going on. We'll just talk about what we want the neck to look like. I'm gonna pick a towel here. All right. I hope this wasn't important. It was. All right, so in the neck, in modern necks, you're gonna have, there's a couple different kinds of rods that you'll see. You're gonna see single action compression rods. You'll see double action rods. You'll see some crazy rods like let's say Gibson, and there was a period in the early 90s where they were putting rods in their necks for a couple of years, that the whole rod would turn, and it was supposed to act as a double action rod, but when they would glue the fingerboard on, glue would get into the slot and the rod just doesn't work. And then you'll see all these crazy Gibsons. They'll usually have not a 5/16 for a nut, it'll have like a 1/4 inch. And then you can tell, you can feel it whenever you adjust one. And you gotta be very careful with those. So let's say what you would want, I'm gonna exaggerate this, what you would want to see in a neck when you look into from the side of the neck right here. Well, let's say that's how we're looking. Of course, this side being the nut, that's the nut. You'd want to see a small amount of relief. This is exaggerating. You come to the end where it meets the body, and this fall off is exaggerated too. I'm just showing so you can see. You would want some fall off there. So we've got relief, and then we have fall off. What I see most of the time in necks, and this is okay too because you're going to end up trying to adjust this out. And there's tricks you can do with how much relief you put into a neck to accomplish this or get close. What I see most of the time is the neck has its relief, this being the nut, looking from the side, and then it comes back up. You'll see this a lot too. You'll see where a neck starts with its relief, has a hump, a dip, may or may not have fall off or may come back up. This, I think, happens a lot over time, and I see it more with guitars that have an angled back headstock. So let's say that that's the guitar neck. I'm a great artist, right?
Does the angled back headstock cause that, do you think, or is it just something
I believe, and I sit there, I'm nerdy enough to sit there at night and try to think this out, that when you have, of course, when you have strings that come off of your headstock, it's going to pull a neck, just like a bow and arrow, just like an archery bow. It's going to pull a neck. Now, when you apply downward pressure here at the nut slot, it makes the neck do slightly odd things. And usually it's just with 1 or 2 thousandths of an inch. What I'll notice is I usually get, everything's nice and flat, and I'll usually get a hump. And we'll see this. My plan is to pull out my dad had a 66 Gibson J45. So we're gonna pull all the frets out of it, playing the board. It has that issue. It kind of comes up, back down. I have never taken care of it because it's my guitar, and I don't have time to look at my stuff. But this allows me time to do it. And it'll force me to do a good job on my own stuff, because usually on my own stuff, I go through it pretty quick because I'm ready to get back onto another job. So I'll have to sit here and press you with it. So I won't rush through it just because it's mine. I believe it has to do with downward pressure on the nut. Makes things different. I notice that if I don't see it as much in Fenders. What I see in like Fenders electrics, I'll see a neck do odd things, and I believe the culprit. I typically see them have rising tongues, and they'll do this pretty bad. I see it really bad on basses. Fender basses. They'll come down and they'll have a huge rise. So that's the whole neck. Completely exaggerated, of course. This is where the nut is, and then, we have the headstock. Don't have as much downward pressure on the nut. That's typically why they'll stay in tune better. We'll go into, when we start talking about nuts, tuning issues you're gonna have with guitars, and how to try to keep from having those issues. So when this is joined to a body, typically Fender and most bolt-on builders put a shim here, and that's the bottom of the body cavity. This, where your pickups are. It's a terrible drawing, of course. All right, so in here you have this gap, and you're actually putting 2 screws here, to bolt it on, and 2 screws here to bolt it on. And essentially, over time, that air gap ends up slightly warping that whole neck. Usually not very much, maybe 10 thousandths of an inch, but 10 thousandths of an inch is going to keep you from being able to bend the string and not choke out, because those strings are going to bottom out. You're also going to have a problem that, with bending strings, you've got a radius on a fingerboard. If you're looking down the end of the fingerboard in this direction, if you're looking down that direction of a fingerboard, you've got your radius. And we'll talk about that and how it affects playability and different things like compound radiuses and your regular just cylinder radius, meaning that it would be the same radius all the way down. So there's things that you would do in a situation where you weren't going to plane the fingerboard and you have a rising tongue like this. All right, so with that, we'll start with, well, first I'll show you how a double action rod works.
Is there an advantage to having a double action as opposed to like a single action?
Well, a double action is nice because, of course, you can go both ways. Let's pretend you get finished building a guitar. And what I see all the time is when you finish building a neck, you're typically going to use, most people are going to use an aliphatic resin like Tightbond, or fish glue. That's become really popular. I like fish glue. I've only been using it for 3 to 4 years, so the jury's still out on it. I got nervous one day because I was listening to TJ Thompson talk about, and TJ Thompson's a repairman that I got a lot of respect for. He's a guitar builder too. He said that he put a whole guitar together with fish glue, and then like 6-7 months later, a customer calls, I've got a buzz in my guitar. They sent the guitar back to him. And he goes, I think I got a loose brace. He said he got in there, and he said every brace was loose. It wasn't a single. Now that was years ago. That was before Stu Mack started releasing that fish glue. So I never tried it until Stu Mack released some. I was like, well, hopefully they tested this a lot. So I started using it, and I haven't had any issues with it. I like it because it reacts just like high glue, and it will also bond with high glue. Where aliphatic resins is just not, if you can't really glue on the glue, unless it's going to be something like a high glue, because high glue is water soluble. You can take high glue that has been dried for years, and you can turn it back into glue by putting water and heat with it. It just turns it back to glue. Your fish glues will do that too. So I got way off on that.
So why is one better than the other?
Well, here's why I like high glue. We've got a 59 Martin that's in that case over there. So if that neck's never been taken off, it's got a high glue joint. So if I take that joint and I steam that joint out, and once I pull the neck off, I don't have much of an issue with heat and moisture. I can get the joint apart usually a little quicker, but not always. Especially some of those old Martins, they had such a good joinery that they're a little tough. But I will say this: once I take that neck off, I can actually just wash the glue off. I'll just take a warm rag and just clean it off, so I don't have to remove any of the original wood until it's wood that I have to remove to do a neck set. So the dovetail stays perfect the whole time. Now, if it's aliphatic resin, I can't really get it off of water, so I end up doing a lot more chisel work to the dovetail. So what it means is that you can keep doing that repair over and over and over, and it'll last. I've got my Martin. It was made in 1893. It's probably got 3 neck resets on it, and luckily somebody's always used high glue on it. It's not to say that the world's going to end if you use Titebond. 19 Martin stopped using high glue. I don't know exactly when, but I can't say this. I've done a neck reset in 1964, early serial number, and it was high glue. And then I've done a 1964 that was a later serial number, close to the end of the year, and it was an aliphatic resin. And which is okay. The first neck reset I ever did was on that 64. I was so young, I didn't know how to use high glue, and I hadn't learned high glue yet. And I glued it back together with Titebond. I regret it, but one day I'll take it off and I'll redo it, but not today. So, with that said, and you're gonna have to forgive me because I will get off track here. I'm real bad about getting on a tangent about something else. And again, anytime you got a question, just stop me and all right. So here's a double action rod. There's a bunch of different kinds. This is my favorite. It's a hot rod that Stu Mack sells. It's got 2 pieces of brass on the end. You've got 2 rods in there, and when you tighten one rod, it's going to make the other rod react because you're shortening one rod, and then the other rod is since it's not moving, it's gonna bend one way or the other. So.
And it's just one of those rods move?
Yeah, just one of the rods move.
And the other one's the one that's supposed to bow?
Yeah. So you'll see this, and then it starts to make sense real quick. I've got to find something to adjust it with. This this is the hard thing about not being in your own shop.
You got a set of Allen wrenches here, if you need.
What?
A set of Allen wrenches if you need.
I won't need it on this one. Just adjust it with a drill bit. It's a spoke wheel, which I like. And the reason I've started to use those is that, well, here, I got a neck that, right here, and we'll pass this stuff around. The reason I use these is that I'll leave the whole channel that I cut in this neck, and then after I show you this, I'll just pass this around. I'm gonna have more of a chance if something ever messes up with this rod by just taking the neck off the guitar and pulling the rod out and then shoving another rod back in. Just like you can do with Rickenbackers. Rickenbackers are built that way. I'll go into their rods. Those look like double action rods, but they're single action rod. Anybody familiar with Rickenbacker basses and guitars?
Yeah.
Don't they have like two truss rods in them?
Yeah, they'll have two, and they'll be, I'll draw a picture in a minute. And then I used to have a big tutorial on how to pull those rods out and repair them. I need to post it back to my website. So when I tighten this rod, here's the neck, let's pretend it's in the neck, and I want to tighten this rod, it's going to have a 0 point. This is loose right there. This nut doesn't come off. And so what I see, and the reason why I would like to be able to pull rods out, is sometimes this will snap off. So if you can somehow get the rod back out without having to take the whole fingerboard off, it's going to be nice. So when you tighten this rod, we get a bow. It's going to pull your neck into a back bow. And we go back to the 0 point. So then, if we want to go the other way, it's going to go right the opposite. See how it works? Anybody see that?
Yeah, that's cool.
I know. It's amazingly simple, but for some reason, I love it. It's just like- so that's how double action rod works. Now, with that said, you know, some people don't like double action rods because one, you put a whole nother rod in the neck. You got a cavity there that takes up more space than a single action rod. And so some people say it affects the tone. That tone is really, I've said this a million times, tones, we always say like, how does it sound, how does it sound? And I usually say, well, the more expensive it is, the better it sounds. That's what everybody thinks. I mean, if we hear Brazilian rosewood, and we all love it because it's beautiful. But if it was super cheap and just readily available, we wouldn't be searching out for these guitars made out of Brazilian rosewood. You know, that's just, I mean, if this is going to be the last piece of pine, then pine's going to be an amazing tone wood. That's just from my experience. So, with that said, tone, and who knows what our ear sounds, you know, actually hear. I mean, my family does this all the time. About once a year, my kids will pull out their iPad and they'll come in and they'll say, Dad, here. And they have this app, and this app comes up, and it has all these, it's supposed to check you for color blindness. And when it comes up, you'll see all these little dots on this iPad, right? And in those dots, you're supposed to be able to see a number. Has anybody ever done this? Yeah, well, they love it because apparently half of the numbers I can't see. They all scream like, you're crazy, you're handicapped. It's just like, okay, well, anyway, so our eyes do that. The taste buds do it. You know, when I eat cilantro, it tastes like soap. Anybody else does it taste like soap? Well, that's a genetic thing.
Yeah.
Other people, like my wife, looked at me like I was crazy. You know, I used to think that that some people, when they would eat asparagus, that their pee would stink, and other people didn't. Apparently, it all does. Some people just can't smell it. So it gives, you know, it's a gross way to say it. But so our ears probably do the same thing. And why would it not? You know, so this whole. But anyway, that's a double action rod. That's how it is inside a neck. That's how it is.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm totally ignorant. I've never taken a guitar apart. I built one ukulele and that's the extent of my expertise. How does that bend anything? What are you bending with this rod? I
Okay.
understand the neck gets warped, I got that.
Yeah, but here's, okay, so that's a good question. I'm glad you asked it, 'cause- all right, so when that neck's in there, let's just do it with this neck. I don't know how well the rod's gonna react since it's a, all right, so let's see what this neck is. I literally glued this fingerboard on there the day before yesterday, and just to try to get some pieces going. I've gotten in this. I was always making banjos, and I got in this kick lately where I've been making electric guitars. Because one of the guys that was working in my shop, he graduated from Gallup Guitar School Luthery, and he's young and he's into electrics, and I've always been into electrics anyway because I've always played in rock bands. Oddly enough, decided to make banjos.
That's a culture shock.
So let's see. I zeroed this out earlier, and I'm counting. That was where it's zeroed out, and then my plunger goes down. So I'm counting back from 0 here. Can you read that on there?
You're gonna want to move
Yeah, let's see what we got here.
All right. So I'm measuring right now from those 2 points.
Too much light.
Too much light.
that.
Okay.
Tap on it. There you go.
So we're reading 0. I mean, we're reading 5 thousandths relief because we're 5 off from the 0 there. You know, as soon as that dog caliper is on 0, it's going backwards.
That's measuring the middle post.
Yeah, that's measuring the center of the, or where I've got the centerpiece, which is the plunger, which is close to the 7th fret.
So it's bowed up, right?
It's actually going this way.
Bowed down, okay.
So if I pull the plunger up as if it was a back bow, it's going to go the other way. So we're going down from 0. All right, so let's pretend that we're going to adjust this neck. We're not going to pretend we're going to do it.
How many thousandths of an inch do you want in a good relief?
I like 5 thousandths. I like to start at 5 thousand.
Right.
Yeah, but it would be different once I carve this neck and put it on a guitar. We're probably going to go up to 15 thousandths
Oh, really?
at that point. I don't know for a fact, but that's my gut instinct. So let's see if I can adjust this while this is on here without dropping it and breaking. If I'm smart, I'm going to drop this over. I did.
So you said 5 thousandths before you put strings on it?
No. When we do the setup next, I'm going to go into that.
Okay.
And why I like 5 thousandths and why I start there. This is a little thing that goes on here that helps keep it from flipping. All right, so we're right there. Now when I see when I tighten that rod, see now we're back at 0.
Was that like an eighth of a turn from center?
Yeah, that was about a quarter of a turn on this
Quarter
one.
turn?
How much can they turn? Like, can you do
Every guitar is different,
Oh, really?
and I'm going to go into that too on like the stiffness of the neck. So now we've got that. We're should be pretty close to dead flat. We don't know exactly what the tongue does, but I haven't planed this fingerboard. When I say plane, we typically are going to be sanding it with a bar. So when I look at it, I'm not seeing too much light or any kind of bits. So
So it's pretty universal with every truss rod that tightening them will give them relief, and loosening them will give them.
well, loosening it's will let relief go into the neck. The neck's going to go this way, and tightening it's going to go the opposite way. All right. So I can look at that with the rod in there, you can take the rod out, however you want to, pass it around.
Does one style of guitar like one style of truss rod better than the other? So like Fender's like the double action and Gibson styles like the single action, or does
Well,
it matter?
Fender rods are kind of neat, you know. I don't like them, but they're technically double action rods. They work like a double action rod, but they're actually a single action compression rod. So, I'm not gonna waste toilet paper since it's a high commodity here. All right, so the end of, if you have, who's familiar with Fender necks? Okay, so on an American-made Fender neck, you've noticed that it has a plug in a small hole where you adjust the neck. That plug doesn't allow for the bolt, the nut in there to come out. Okay, it's smaller, the hole diameter is smaller, so the nut actually butts up against that plug. So what happens is, since you have your nut, this is looking inside the neck here, from the side. You know, this is your bolt with the threads. It goes down here, and it's gonna be anchored at one end, okay? Sometimes it's gonna, so this doesn't move. So when you tighten this, that rod, and this is how a compression rod works. A compression rod is installed into a neck at an angle. It's anchored on one end. You have your adjustment, typically, let's say that's at the headstock. And so when you tighten this bolt, it doesn't have anywhere to go, so it wants to straighten because it's put inlaid into a channel. And, you know, of course, the neck channel that you cut is the arch. That's what forces it into the arch. You haven't bent the actual rod, it forces it down in there. And then you glue your top strip on above it, and then so that's how a compression rod works. Since it's angled, and when you tighten it, it wants to straighten out. On a Fender, American-made Fender, on the end of this Allen bolt, you know, this is where your Allen wrench would go in and adjust. There's a glued-in plug. And there's the headstock. There's the fingerboard, the nut, frets, and so on. Go in here, that's a glued-in plug, and the hole here is a smaller diameter. So when you start to back off this rod, it's going to press against this plug, and it's going to force the neck to go the other way. So, what happens when you break one of these? You strip it out. It's only 1/8 of an inch Allen. It happens all the time. They'll take a ball end wrench, stick it in there, and they strip it out. And then it's a nightmare. Because then you got to get rid of the plug. And you're dealing with something that is stripped out most of the time. If you're lucky, they make an Allen key, an Allen wrench that is tapered. They're called grippers. And then you can put one of those in here. First, you would take a soldering iron, protect the face. You put a soldering iron in this plug, is generally how I do it. That will soften up the glue joint. They glue it in with an aliphatic resin like Titebond. And if you can grab that nut, when you start to back it out, it will actually press the plug out with the softened glue. And then once you get it out, now you can use a screw extractor. I've went through so many of them where I'll take a screw extractor and try to get it down in there. Sometimes I'll enlarge this hole since I know I'm gonna be scrapping the plug. Put my screw extractor in there and then be able to turn it and get it out. It is a pain. And that's why in some cases I like Mexican-made necks better. They don't have that. It's not a biflex rod. They call it a biflex rod. It's essentially a kind of genius idea. You know, you use a single action rod, but since you you know, and the reason it makes it go the other way is when you loosen that bolt and it presses up against it, it makes the rod longer, so it's gotta go the other way. So that's how that works.
So the neck bends because the rod is attached at both ends? and that-
Yeah, you got a rod attached at one end, you got, and at the other end, when you tighten it, it's going to force the rod has no place to go, it's gonna wanna straighten out, when you tighten that bolt.
It's the tension on the wood makes the wood move. The whole neck moves, right?
Yeah.
The whole neck. part.
Yeah, the whole neck from typically from where the rod's gonna end to the nut. And then so when you adjust it, like I said, it wants to straighten out. And the reason you're doing that is because your strings are pulling tension. If you guys, once you string it up, it's pulling tension one way, and the rod counteracts that tension.
Okay.
And so that's why, that's why you want to put a rod in there. Now, there's other ways to do it without rods. Bar frets are one of them. Bar frets are
I
one
just
of them.
didn't understand the mechanics of how what made the wood bend.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was what was bothering me.
Uh,
I got it.
I hope that makes a little more sense. It's kind of hard to explain compression rods. Double action rods are nice because you can see it work, when you saw it, and actually see the rod rise up, making the neck go one way or the other. But, all right, so,
Did I understand you correctly to say in the single action compression rod that the channel itself is not flat, or did I misunderstand that?
okay, yeah, compression rod, now, I will say that's a good question, because when people first started to make truss rods, you would see them in Epiphone arch tops. Every once in a while, you'll get an Epiphone arch top from the 40s, and you'll see this rod right underneath the fingerboard extension. And you're like, oh great, this thing's got a rod. It doesn't do very much at all. That's because they put it in a straight channel. The first guitar I ever built was, made a straight channel and put a rod in there, a compression rod. Anchored at one end and didn't have any kind of concave to it. And it never
The channel
worked.
itself.
Yeah, the channel itself
Okay.
is concave. So you would have to build some sort of jig that's gonna let your router go, when you route it out. And then when you put your top piece that goes in the top of it is gonna match that, so it's gonna press the rod in there and it gets glued in. And then, you don't really want glue on your rod, you just want that to fill there, so when you tighten it, it has to straighten. You can't go anywhere other than to try to just straighten through that neck. And since everything's holding it there, it'll straighten the neck. And so it needs to be that way. If it's a straight rod, it's not gonna do much but just compress the wood. So the first guitar that I've ever made, the rod doesn't work. It just compresses the wood. I mean, it may have changed it like 1/1000th of an inch, but I just kept thinking, why's my rod not working? It's because I didn't know what I was doing. And
Is the channel concave on a double action as well? or
no, the double action, that's the beauty of a double action rod, is it can be a straight channel, and you can take your wood board, and when you want to put that rod in there, I start with a board like this. That's a piece of maple, roasted. I did an experiment. This is great. I bought these maple blanks. They were, this one, that one, and the other one that you're holding. They're all the same dimensions. And I weighed them. This was 2.1 pounds. And then I took them home and I put them in my oven for 5 hours at 335 degrees. And I just cooked them. Wow.
Just like torrification.
Yeah, it's kind of like torrification. I think torrification is going to be a little more in depth.
Right.
And so that's what I was experimenting. I got 2 guitars over here that I built that have torrified neck blanks that I bought like this, but they were torrified. And I liked the color, and from using torrified spruce, I enjoy the wood and the way it works, the way it feels, the way it sounds when I tap it. It makes everything harder. Now, roasting maple neck, I'm very new at it, so I'm just experimenting. What I did notice is when I put it back on the scales afterwards, instead of weighing 2.1 pounds, this board, it's 1.93. So a little bit lighter. And then I would see the resins coming out of it, so you're cooking resins and all that. And it did actually change, the board slightly warped, and then after I did that, I planed it flat. And then I take a router table with the correct size router bit, and I cut my channel while that was face down with a fence, and my router bit's sticking up. So I just run it down, and I do it in like 4 or 5 passes.
If you want to use the.
Oh yeah, I love it. That's great. So I have it all set on here because this is just a template to put on there. Trace it out, fan saw out if I want to. I can use a router. We'll go into that stuff too. Some questions on that. Electric guitar. If you've never built anything, the first thing to do is to build an electric guitar. It's fun. It's easy. You don't have to have a lot of tools. All right. So let's go into if we were going to set up a guitar.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Yeah, yeah.
Restaurants? So you said you don't need like a dip in your channel when you're putting a double action in, but is it like a rule of thumb to have that like dip in your channel when you're doing a single action?
Yeah.
Okay.
You'll need
For like all of them?
Yeah. You'll need a you'll need a well, unless it's a Rickenbacker style rod.
Yeah.
Because it works kind of like the, well, I'll get this down. So your Rickenbacker style rod looks like a double action rod. You can go, and there are 2 rods, and it looks like this.
Oops.
Jay.
That didn't work.
Oh, wait, just one. See ya now.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe find one for you.
Colors and all?
All right, so
Trade places.
you've got a rod that goes this way, you heat the end up and bend it, and it goes all the way back. One extends, and you cut threads into this side of the rod. That's where your threads will be cut. Your bolt's gonna go on here. I mean, your nut's gonna go on there. And then you have basically, this extends, you've got a washer. And the washer's pressing up against this side of the rod. And when you tighten this is gonna bow up. And if it's in a channel, that's gonna try to follow that same way. And that's a single action rod, because when you take it off, it just goes the other way. I mean, it just comes off. And so when you compress it, it'll make a neck go into a backbone. And those are put into a straight channel. And it's a real simple. Now, if you have that kind of rod, or if you ever make that kind of rod, always clamp your neck in the back bow before you adjust it, because all you're going to do is strip these out, because those typically aren't strong enough to just adjust a neck on its own. It's strong enough to hold it there. So you would want to clamp your neck in a back bow, meaning you would take a bar, put it on the fingerboard, take a block here and a block here, and then put a clamp in the center and clamp it into a back bow, and then adjust your rod. And if you have a rod that's hard to adjust, you would want to do that too. You would want to clamp it to a back bow.
That's to take the pressure off the rod.
Yeah, so the threads don't have to do the job.
And is that right end of the rod, is it anchored to anything, or is it just laying in the groove?
On that style rod, it's just laid in the groove.
Okay.
That's why you can take these out. I see them all the time. They usually don't break. The threads strip out. And then so in a Rickenbacker base, they cut the channel from the headstock all the way to the body cavity where the pickup is. So then you can start tapping, take the nut off and start tapping it this way. Once it comes through the other side of the neck, you can pull it out. Okay, then you can, yeah, Jim?
I got a banjo, and it's got a single action rod in it, and it's got a back bow like this, okay?
Uh-huh.
And I can't adjust that out with the single action rod. So the question is, can I put that in a jig and force it down and then tighten that rod up?
Wait, it's already in a back bow, right?
Yes. Yeah, the peg goes down, so a back bow is where the hook is in the middle.
Yeah.
It's in a slight back bow, and I can't tighten it out because it's a single action rod.
Well, if you don't want to tighten it down anymore.
You can't loosen it.
Oh, so it loose.
Yeah, so
Well, you-
it's loose.
You can attempt, there's a couple different things you can do. In theory, you could string it to pitch. So here's the problem. You've got a backbone and a neck, and the strings aren't going to pull it anymore. So you can try heavier gauge string. That's the cheapest, quickest fix. That might pull more in. You can use heat. Heat may work. I get some good results with it. Not all the time. It's unpredictable. The best results I've gotten, honestly, was taking I had a Deering Good Time banjo that was and I wouldn't have done this on a guitar because I couldn't. But on the banjo, I took the neck off. It was in a back bow. I clamped it into a forward bow and took it out to my car and left it in there all day long in the middle of summer and just let it cook, just like what happens to guitars when they get the bow. And I came back in, next day I left it clamped up, and it actually worked. It had changed the neck. Enough from when I put strings in there, it had enough relief to not get buzzing. The reason you don't want a back bow in the first place is you're going to be fighting. Oh, I already lost that. There is one. You know, let's say your neck is in a back bow. You got all your frets going all the way down. This is your string. When you press the string down to, let's say this fret's gonna hit that one. It's real simple. You're fighting an uphill battle. The reason you want relief in the neck, and this is extremely exaggerated, is that when you pick that string, it's gonna spin in a circle. It's just like if me and Carl pulled jump rope, and you grab that jump rope and you pulled it and let it go, it's gonna spin. And the harder you pull it and let it go, the bigger it's gonna spin, and then it's gonna come. So that's why you'll see this at a guitar shop all the time. Somebody comes in and they go, "You hear that buzz?" I'll be like, "Yeah, I hear it." "You did a bad job setting my guitar." And then you have to explain the mechanics of the guitar. And so when I'm picking that string hard, it's slapping that fret. Now let's say you're a sloppy player like I am. This guitar's got a high action, so I'm not getting much buzzing. But when I lay into a guitar, I'll get buzz. So what I do is, on my personal guitars, I'll give myself sometimes a little more relief, or deal with the fact that I'm a buzzy, nasty player. One of the two. So what you're doing when you give a guitar relief, you're letting it breathe. You're letting that string from the fret in front of it have a little more room to move before it comes around its cycle and taps that fret, because that's what it's doing. It's coming around going tap, 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 and you get that sizzle there, that buzz. So you can technically adjust an action. When I say action on a guitar, we'll make sure that we all know the terms. Action, I'm talking about the overall string height above a certain point of the neck. And when we usually refer to action on a guitar, we're usually referring to the 12th fret. Okay, because this is kind of universal. We all say, it's got 3 30-second action. And we're usually referring to the 12th fret. Now, I'm going to go through with different actions at different spots and how they, with this setup, and how they work together. But, so that's why you want some relief. And, if I skip too far ahead from what I was talking about earlier, someone just remind me. I'm bad about getting off of,
So Jason, what do you want before you put any strings on a guitar at all? Because those strings are obviously going to create tension and they're going to make it, they're typically going to make it bow up probably.
Yeah.
So do you want it as flat as possible before you put strings on?
that's not gonna matter because you don't know how stiff the neck is.
Okay.
So, like I said, when I made that adjustment to that neck earlier, this is the electric guitar neck I had earlier, it's gonna react different than after I carve it. So it's gonna depend on how well the frets were put in. And I see that bad all the time. I see 70, this is what I see a lot. 70s Martins come in, and during the 70s, everybody was trying to start mass producing guitars. So you start having some really, I mean, it had to happen because otherwise we wouldn't learn how to make that many instruments at one time. But it suffered. It suffered at Martin, it suffered at Gibson, it suffered at Fender, everybody's, you see the price value of those guitars go down. What I see in Martins is in the 70s, they switched their rods, which they didn't have adjustable rods in it. They had neck reinforcement. And we'll go into the Martin stuff because I'm going to touch base on all that. But more importantly, their fret work wasn't as good as it was in the previous years. So I will see more relief in those necks. So imagine if you've got, and goes back, Jim's question originally started all this, of what he could do with his guitar, or his banjo. And is this a banjo you made?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I won't cut it down.
I didn't realize it was a single action rod, we put it in there, I don't know why.
Well, you've got a back bow, most likely from when you glue the fingerboard on.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you glue your fingerboard on, and this is why double actions are good, double action rods, is typically if you're using a water-based glue, which you're gonna want to, you're not gonna wanna use epoxy. Because if you ever have to take the board off or something goes wrong, then, you're just kind of sunk, you just got to cut through it, which is fine too, if it's your own guitar. But when I would make banjos, guitars, almost every time after I glue a fingerboard on, even if I clamped it dead flat, the neck would end up being in a back bow, and that's because that moisture in that water swells and then it sets. And I don't think it's a bad thing because, one, you can plane it out, but you've got this natural where it fights the strings. And that's probably what you've got going on, Jim, is that if you put a double action rod, you would end up forcing that out. 8 months from now, then it would be too much relief and you'd have to go the other way. Or that's what I tend to see on my guitars, banjos. And I've tried everything from high glue to fish glue to tight aliphatic resin, tight bond. We're just gonna call it tight bond because it's easier to say than aliphatic resin. I've used all those glues to put necks on. Now when I put it on with fish glue, because I didn't.
I guess earlier when I asked the question about glue, what do people see positive about fish glue as opposed to hide glue? Why?
That's what I'm learning. I'm trying to figure out.
Okay.
Now, if I prefer one glue or other, it's going to be high glue. Now, the positives of fish glue is that you've got a lot of work time. High glue, you got 60 seconds maybe.
Can you reinvigorate fish glue like you described?
Yes. Yeah, so you can, your fish glue, once you mix water back with it, then it's gonna do that. And that's why it works. So like if, let's say that an old Martin is high glue and I've got to re-glue a brace.
Right.
Well, I don't want to go in there and do a whole lot of sanding underneath the brace because I know inevitably that I'm gonna be taking wood out. I can't, I'm going blind, I'm just in there and trying to feel around and checking with a mirror. So what I want to do is a lot of times I'll go and try to soften up whatever high glue's in there too. You know, I might use a little bit of sanding, but mostly I'm gonna use a crude spatula that I've drilled holes into. So, I'm gonna pass this around. If you notice, the edges of this are rough. It's got holes drilled into it. This is a cheap spatula. I've got tons of them. I go to Hobby Lobby and I buy the cheapest ones that you mix paint, I guess, for painters. I keep the handles on some of them I pull the handles off of. I've got holes in it for a couple different reasons. One, it kind of has a grit to it. Some of them, when I drill, I'll leave a little bit of the burrs that come off from the drill. So when I get it underneath the brace, it almost is pulling out the chips of glue. The other thing I'll do is, since it has holes in it, and you're trying to get underneath the brace, the glue will drop down in the holes, and it will slide that glue underneath that brace. You see what I'm saying? So it actually, this will spread the brace up from the width, which is like 10/1000ths of an inch, you know, and then the glue, as you push in, will drop into the holes and it'll help push it underneath there. And then, because you're flying blind, you can't hardly see what you're doing, you know, and you kind of feel, and then you'll start to feel that spatula go from dry to wet. You know, you can feel it slip around in there. And then with your fish glue, like what I'll do is try to get some warm water, a couple drops on there, and get it underneath there. Hopefully it's softening up that high glue some. And then my wet fish glue, and the beauty about fish glue is it'll stay wet for a long time. I think it's got like a 24-hour glue time. Now, and it'll stay wet. Now there's some issues with that, especially if you're a violin maker and you're using fish glue, okay? So, since it stays wet so long, you know, an end block on a violin is a lot different than an end block on a guitar. An end block on a violin, I'm gonna chain this to me. An end block on a violin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't do a lot of violin work. I did a lot when I was younger. The grain's gonna go up and down. So where your top plate's glued on to your end block and your neck block, you've got end grain up here, right? Mm-hmm. Who here makes violins? I know some of you do. So if you, let's say you were going to use fish glue on that, it stays wet a whole lot. And so it'll soak down into that end grain and then give you a dry glue joint. I mean, like a starved glue joint. Versus a guitar, if you're looking at the tail block at the back of the guitar, that grain runs up and down. On a tail block of a guitar, the grain runs the same as the sides. So the advantages of this is it's easy to carve a dovetail joint in a violin because you're not cutting end grain. When you cut a dovetail joint, you got end grain coming here. So it's hard to cut. It's a pain to go in here and shave the inside of a block, which we typically don't do. We all do the neck instead of the guitar. That's what we're always taught to do when we're doing a neck set, if you're fitting a dovetail joint. So, the advantages to this is, since you have a top and a back, and your sides of the acoustic run the same grain, then you've got a better chance of these woods expanding and contracting at the same rate. Versus on a violin, and what I see and have to repair a lot, is if you're looking down at the top of a violin, that would be your bottom block there. I see cracks right here all the time on either side of the block. And that's because the block didn't shrink and the sides did, and then they would come loose from here, and then you would develop cracks on the side. But I suspect they probably wanted to run the grain this way because you have an end pin, and it has tension from your tailpiece that goes over. So imagine a guitar doesn't have that. it doesn't have tension going this way. So this probably holds that tension better than a guitar. Now, it's easy to split a guitar this way with a block. See, that prevents that on a violin because you've got a grain going this way and you've got a grain going this way. So if you have a grain going this way on a guitar, you ship that guitar with the end pin in it, and that case gets hit hard, and that end pin is right on the back of that case, it'll split the guitar.
When you're talking about hide glue again, you're talking about pot. What about that hide glue that you can get that's liquid in the plastic?
Titebond makes.
Made by Titebond.
Yeah, I'm scared of it, but
Yeah.
I don't have a, I never use it. And,
Read the expiration date on the bottle.
yeah, I think there's old brown glue, and then there's a Titebond makes a hide glue. I just, I don't have much experience with it. And the reason I don't have much experience with it, and it could be just somewhat people, they just don't like it. So I always hear, don't use it, it's not good. So I don't know. I don't have any experience with it myself, so I can't really say that it's bad. It's just, I've never wanted to try it.
Well, that's a bummer, because I just put a whole guitar together.
Well, no, that's not a bummer. It's not a bummer at all, because then we're going to find out what happens to the guitar. No, I mean, that's what all this, and that's what all this is about. I mean, that's a wonderful thing, and that's a good thing to know, because I see you 5 years from now, and you say, that guitar, I hold it up just fine. Then that's a good thing. I mean, so. Well, that's what I was doing the other night. I was like, well, I gotta make some necks. Let's just throw them in the oven. Let's see what happens. I mean, it's a fun thing to do. On the tail block thing, if you notice, if you ever look inside Martin's, they have a tail block and a neck block that runs this direction. The same grain as the body, as the sides. If you're looking inside the guitar, from the sound hole this way, they have a piece of wood with that grain, a strip where the grain runs the opposite way, and it makes the whole block thicker. So if you're installing a pickup on your 70s Martins, those blocks are already fat, and then they have that piece there, and you're gonna be in a situation where you don't have enough room for that jack to go. And you'll have to come up with some other idea. Typically, I will just, you just don't have a strap button there. You can still have room for an input jack, but you're not gonna be able to put your strap button part on there. And then the player's gonna have to decide what they wanna do, or if you can find longer jacks. All right, so a lot of times I say this stuff. I know that most of you probably want to get in building or something. I take building and repair, and I look at it like, they go hand in hand. Now the difference is I want to be known for building. For repair, I want to be a ghost. I mean, that's the goal. I mean, the best compliment is when someone doesn't notice that I've been in there or I've done something to the guitar. And that's not always going to be the case. If I knock my teeth out and get false teeth, that's what they are. Our bodies don't heal. We have scars. Guitars are going to have that too. If you do extensive damage, it just wants to be done tastefully. If you get into repair work, if it's tasteful, I would rather see a tasteful repair than a guitar. Like I used to do a lot of fading into dark colors to hide this or hide that. Well, there's no reason. It was broken. It's got a scar. If it's done tastefully and everything's put back where it's supposed to be, then it's actually nice to look at. It's like, wow, that's nice. If you see I stopped repairing headstocks with splints. I just don't believe they do anything. If you get the first crack at it and everything goes, but I would get these headstocks, and for a while I would cut these two big arches on either side, fill those with wood, and then cleat. And that was a pretty repair because it looked like you had a butterfly on the back of your neck, or like two wings. The splints that run this way, those could work, but you gotta remember, most guitars have a scarf joint. Not most guitars, but a lot of guitars already have a scarf joint. So if you have a headstock break and you get the first crack at gluing it up, glue it up with fish glue. If you don't have hide glue, try to glue it with hide glue. Your tight bond, you're not gonna be able to wash that back out or reactivate it if something happens, you know, with it, if it gets cracked off again.
On that note, particularly like with vintage guitars, if you have a vintage guitar and you snap the headstock on it, or the headstock breaks for whatever reason, what you just said, a lot of people in the old days would do a repair, and then they would, you know, fill it, repaint it and all that to make it look, basically to try to hide it. But particularly in the vintage guitar world, people would much rather see the actual break, the fact that it's structurally sound and all that, because that is the unknown of a previous headstock break scares a lot of people off if you ever wanted to sell this thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas, you know, immediately, vintage guitar people and guitar people as a whole know that if you look at the back of a headstock and it's black and the rest of the guitar is not black, that wasn't supposed to be there, and that was broken, you have no idea how it was put together, who did it. But like you said, if you do a clean repair, even with the scar there, it's much more desirable down the road if you want to
Than
reset.
not knowing what's underneath there.
Right.
Of course, you don't know what glue's in there, you know, you always just hope. And you know, I see a lot of guitars repair with tight bond on the headstock, and they hold just fine. And we'll say this, oh, go ahead.
If you go to the Gibson website and you look at the specs on their guitars, they're touting, oh, it's put together with Tide Bond 50.
It's Tide Bond 50?
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds
What is that?
scary.
Yeah. And you have to
Sounds
order it. I actually ordered some from Amazon because you can't find it anywhere, not even StuMac. And it's just a little tiny container. It just says Tide Bond 50 on it, and I don't know what.
I gotta research that. Maybe there's something good about it. Maybe it's reversible. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know why we keep reinventing the wheel, but
Yeah.
I mean, I do understand that high glue is tough to work with because you've only got a certain amount of time, and so maybe that's one reason I love fish glue, and I've been using it, is because I feel like I can do better repair work because I can concentrate more than trying to get it clamped up as fast as I possibly can. Now bridges, I always try to use high glue. Sometimes I don't. I'll even use different grades of high glue. Like I'll use, if I'm doing a neck reset on a guitar, I'm gonna be cutting that dovetail joint, and I'm gonna be trying to get the best fit that I can. My goal is to be able to technically string up that guitar without any glue. So I don't go mix up fresh high glue for that. I want the next guy to take it off for it to come off fairly easy. I'll take high glue and I'll keep it in the fridge. And let's say if I'm gluing a bridge on, I'll mix my high glue up 50-50 with water, and use that for my bridge re-glues. If I'm doing a neck on a guitar, I'll typically opt to use high glue that wasn't mixed up that day, maybe a week or so earlier. Because I feel like it isn't as strong as the other stuff. What?
Maybe that's what that 50 means, 50%.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
You know, a little trivia about fish glue, it's been around for thousands of years. It was used by archers to glue the sinew on the back of bows because, well, that's the only thing that'll hold sinew and wood together, is high glue or fish glue.
Yeah.
And you can't use aliphatic or anything to hold the sinew
That's
on the back of
interesting.
a bow.
That's interesting. I wanted to get into bow making, but I told myself, no, I don't need it anymore.
So Jason, is the hot glue, you put it on hot, or you just mix it up cold with water?
All right, so when you're gonna mix up granulated high glue, I mix it 50-50. That means I'll take a baby food jar works good, you know, put half water, half high glue, and then let it sit for 30 minutes, just on its own at room temperature. That way all the water like absorbs into the granules. Then I have a glue pot. You want your glue pot to be about 145 degrees, that's what I cook at. I use a hold heat, it just automatically goes to 45 degrees. And I like it because it's also the same temperature that you want your wax to be if you make pickups, when you're potting pickups. If you wind your own pickups for electric guitars, then you can also put wax in there, and when you wax your pickups, you can use the same pot. And then you just want to heat it up until your high glue is completely melted. And then when you're gluing up, like let's say I'm gluing up a bridge, once I have my bridge prepped and my top prepped, I should bring it. It's the wonderful thing about this is, like if somebody wants to see something, then hopefully, like when I leave tonight, I can pick up stuff from the shop. Like let's say we're gonna do a bridge reglue or something like that. If people wanna see that, I'm trying to gauge what people are into, what they wanna learn, what they wanna know. I'm saying the things that I think are valuable to everybody, because back to the whole repair thing. Repair and building go hand in hand. I'd like to sit here and talk to people who build and tell them what I like to see as a repairman. And everything that I build and do, I do it based on how, when I'm building things, how someone's gonna be able to repair it later on. And, cause all these things that you build and do, they're gonna they're gonna outlast you. I mean, cause somebody that knew you, or somebody who bought it, they're going to cherish it, so they're gonna keep it. And then they're gonna pass it on to somebody. And then the stories behind it will get bigger and then more grand, and you know. And then, so this thing's just gonna keep going. And if it's not playable, it's just gonna be wall art. And you don't want to do wall art, because if it's wall art, it's gonna deteriorate even more.
I just, there's a substitute for an expensive glue pot. I think the Stu Mack is what, $200 now, something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
The little pots that the students used to get, they carried to college with them to heat tea and everything in there. Perfect 140 degrees.
Oh, nice.
And you can find them at antique shops.
Hey, can you get like they make those mini crock pots, have you seen those? They're like,
Yeah.
Can you use one of those too?
Get a meat thermometer and put it in there.
Yeah.
You can, because I think it was somebody, my friend Shep, they had rigged up one of those, and they had rigged up
Variable distance.
yeah, that you could adjust and then sit there and work until you get the temperature, and then do that.
This other pot's got a temperature controller on it.
What?
This other pot I referred to has a temperature.
Oh, does it?
If you turn all the way down, it's 140 perfect. It'll set right there at 140.
And then some of those potpourri pots that you can, I took my wife's one time because it would read, they vary, but hers would read right around 140, 145, so I just snatched it until I killed it.
You wanna take a break?
Yeah, take a break.
Right.